Hi there, and welcome back to my presentation about the shape of the Earth. Is it a flat Earth, or does the Earth has a spherical shape? This is part 2, so maybe just a short recap of what we discussed in part 1. In part 1, we discussed the objections to a spherical Earth. I will now continue with the objections that I found on the internet against the concept of a flat Earth. Yeah, I already summarized it here at the bottom. So you could summarize it that in such a way that people forget that they are interpreting and that they do not always have to read literally. What do I mean by that? Well, it's almost as I draw my own conclusion here, but what I want to point out here is that what I understood from flat earthers, if I may call them like that, is that they tend to read reality and also the Bible in a more literally way than I do and other people do. And like science started with observations, it's good that flat earthers do several observations, but they forget that they have to interpret the observations. That's what I think they are doing. We will come back to that in part 3, but first we will discuss now in part 2 the objections that I found, objections from others towards the concept of a flat Earth. So remember, the objections from the flat earthers themselves to a spherical Earth. So we will first discuss these objections to see if these objections are valid. And then we will discuss other objections. Objections against a flat Earth. The objections towards a spherical Earth were mainly 3. So there was a certain distrust towards science in general and NASA in particular. There were also objections based on observation, and thirdly, there were objections based on the Bible. And one of the things I learned when I first heard about this, especially from fellow believers, they asked me, well, do you know what the Hebrew word for deceiving is? I said, no, I don't know. I already knew a bit of Hebrew then, but I didn't know this word. And then they said, well, it's Nesa. Isn't that particular? Well, actually it isn't. And if you would learn Hebrew yourself, or would try to know the words that are used here, or could be used here, and can't be used here, you would find out that the actual word for cheating in Hebrew is not Nesa, but Nasha. And yeah, you could say that sounds pretty much the same, but it's not the same word. And also, NASA is a very appropriate name for an organization that lifts vehicles into space. Just look here and compare for yourself. Nasha on the left side and NASA on the right side. Nasha indeed means to deceive and to beguile. NASA, on the other hand, means to lift up. And remember what NASA claims to do. It also means to carry away, to forgive. And the first mention we find already in the first book of the Bible, in the 4th chapter in verse 13. And it's also meaning to forgive, like I said. So you wouldn't mean, I think, that Nesa is indeed to be read as Nasha. So when there is written forgiveness, that it would be actually cheating. So there wouldn't be any forgiveness at all. Also, so we already discussed the first objection, which wasn't true. Actually, you could say that the flat earther was trying to deceive me here instead of the other way around. Also, when we look at the history of ideas, they claim that until the 15th or 16th century, people thought that the Earth was flat, but that changed when people start thinking for themselves and science developed. Well, history shows that it was exactly the other way around. People had believed in a spherical Earth for quite a long time, since the 4th century BC, actually. It started with Aristotle, but only from the 16th century did other ideas begin to emerge. The Galileo affair led to an essay written in the 16th century by the Benedictine scholar Antoine-Augustin Calmet, who first proposed the idea of a flat Earth with a tent-like canopy. He proposed an interpretation of the creation account that suggested that the inspired writer, in reference for the ignorance of his audience, being the ancient Jews, used language and ideas that would be more easily understood by the original audience. So the heavens were described as a tent-like canopy. Based on an analysis of numerous letters, papers, and other documents from thinkers of the time, historians Geoffrey Burton Russell and Christine Garwood debunked the view that ancient philosophers and scientists of the early Christian church, late antiquity, and the Middle Ages believed that the Earth was flat. There is also no evidence that Mesopotamians believed in a flat Earth. And the etching showing a flat Earth is actually from the 19th century. I mean, this etching. So, the second barrier, the history of ideas, I think we solved that one as well. I don't think it's true what the flat earthers tried to claim, that people believed in the flat Earth until the 16th century. On the contrary. What about the objections to observation then? Okay, remember the first objection, that the Earth would go around its own axis at 1700 kilometers per hour, and that flat earthers say that's not possible. Actually, it's not so much the speed that is a problem. You do not perceive the speed, but you would notice a possible change in speed, a deceleration or acceleration. You could try that for yourself if you just jump in a moving train, and you will notice then that you will return to the same place as long as the train keeps its speed. If this train would accelerate suddenly or would decelerate because it has to brake, for instance, then you would most likely land at a different place, that's for sure. By the way, it's not so much the linear speed on the Earth, but the radial speed, which is relevant here, and that one is much lower. Also, the possible acceleration will not throw you off the Earth because it is much, much lower than the g-force. Actually, the Earth's radial rotational speed is very low, as you can see here. It's 0.034 meters per second. And that's much, much lower than the gravity. Well, gravity, flat earthers say there isn't any gravity, there's only air pressure. Well, if so, why don't objects fall sideways or upwards or backwards or forwards? And how do you explain the fall of objects in a vacuum with the absence of air pressure? You need a force to fall. Just search yourself for videos and explanations about objects in or outside the vacuum. The weight or mass doesn't affect the acceleration, not in air and not in a vacuum, on the condition the volume is the same. But okay, even if you don't agree, let's focus on objects of the same weight. So with a feather of high volume and a stone or metal of low volume of the same weight, we also see a difference inside or outside the vacuum. So outside they fall at a different speed due to air resistance, but inside there isn't any resistance from the air. So gravity pulls them down at the same speed, since it is the only force active. It all fits into the traditional scientific model. Before you say, but what about space? Then why do objects not fall there at the same speed? Well, in space, objects don't fall since the Earth is too far away to exert relevant gravitational force. This also fits into the traditional scientific model. Gravity explains falling downwards. Here we have another formula for the rotational speed with almost the same result. Okay, let's discuss the claim from the flat earthers that there is no evidence for the heliocentric model. Well, I think there is. I mean, gravity, you can prove that it is there. Also, the attraction of objects was demonstrated in the Cavendish experiment. Moreover, everything that you can question in the flat Earth model can be easily explained in the heliocentric model. Even the position of unknown planets is predictable. What about objects then? Do they or do they not disappear behind the horizon? Well, remember the famous camera, the Nikon P900, which they used to say that the Earth was flat. Well, just look at the 3 videos that are mentioned here. And like I said before in part 1, if you just send me an email and ask for a PDF, you will be able to click on those links. I will not show them now because I have many, many slides, and otherwise the presentation will be far too long. But just know for sure that you will not be able to explain this, what you will see here if you click on the link. Also, have you ever tried that camera over land where there is no refraction? You will not be able to reproduce the same results. Yeah, and for objects behind the horizon odd, we also have to bear in mind that there can be something happening that is disturbing what you are seeing, and it's called a mirage. The fact that buildings, ships, and other objects are visible from a great distance is actually just a mirage. Mirage usually occur when a layer of cold, dense air sits above a layer of warm, less dense air, such as when the sun shines on a black road on a hot summer day. The warm ground warms the bottom few inches of air and reflects sunlight up to your eyes to create an inferior mirage. What you can also have is a superior looming mirage. That happens if a layer of warm air sits above your field of view with a cool layer below it. Then you get a superior mirage. Light bends towards the denser air, but because our eyes assume the light has traveled in a straight line, the object appears to be higher than it actually is. This effect also explains why a ship can be seen in the distance even though it may have dipped below the horizon. It can even make distant ships or distant boats appear to float in the air. I will show you a picture in one of the next slides. And here you can see what I described. So the effect that you see objects even if you would not be able to see them normally. But because of this mirage, you see them. And they said it would actually explain why the Vikings discovered certain lands that they wouldn't have been able to discover otherwise, if this effect would not have been there. Yeah, here is the floating ship in the air. I mean, do you trust your senses here? You have to come up with an explanation. So, like I said, there are actually 2 types of mirages. You have an inferior and a superior one. And these are caused by light refraction, which is the bending of light waves. This occurs when light passes through one type of material into another. So it can be through air and into water, or through an area of warm air into an area of cooler air, because cold air is more dense than warm air, or the other way around, of course. Refraction also explains the Bedford experiment. So remember this experiment that I mentioned in part 1. Well, there was another guy named Wallace, and he repeated the experiments of Rowbottom and avoided the errors of the preceding experiments. Errors, yes. Well, he set up a line at 4 meters instead of 20 centimeters, thereby reducing the effects of atmospheric refraction. What he also did is to add a pole in the middle of the length of canal that could be used to see the bump caused by the curvature of the Earth between the 2 endpoints, which he actually saw. Okay, but we still have the distance to the moon, and as calculated by Rob Skipa, it would be about 300 miles. Well, there are other tools that come up with a different result. And also, how is it possible if the moon hangs in the dome and the dome is at a maximum height of 170 kilometers? How is that possible also when the sun is only a few thousand kilometers away? Well, I say only because compared to the heliocentric models, it's much less. Well, it's less. The sun, moon, and stars and the birds are all in one firmament, right? phew, what a big cake that is. And that one rocket went all the way through. Remember the rocket that would have hit the dome? Yeah, but what about the sunshine then, shining through the clouds? I mean, if you just track the divergent beams up to the sun back, then you can only conclude, of course, that the sun is quite nearby. Well, how so? It can also be explained by scattering of light by dust particles. If this were not the case, the sun would only be visible, would only be able to shine through the clouds in that one spot. Finally, curvature. Is it visible or not? Well, there is a video in this link where they try to see the curvature at 37 kilometers. That's already quite high, but it's difficult to see the curvature of the Earth even there. It's difficult at a typical cruising altitude. So when flat earthers claim that they didn't see any curvature when they went by plane, well, that's true, but because you can't see it. The line of sight from an airplane at 7 miles is about 235 miles. And that is just 3.4 degrees from the Earth's surface. At the height of 121,000 feet, that's 3 times more, so approximately 700 miles, so already considerably. But at the International Space Station, it's at 250 miles. The line of sight is 1,435 miles, which covers about almost 20 degrees of the Earth's surface. So it's much easier to see the curvature from there, as you can see in this picture. So most people don't realize how big the Earth is compared to the height of an airplane. We may think we are really high in an airplane, but in proportion, we are just skimming the surface. And here you have a scientific formula for calculating the Earth's curvature. So we can conclude that there is no curvature visible at 37 kilometers, let alone at not even half of it, 16 kilometers. Remember Auguste Piccard, who would have said that the Earth was flat? Well, several objections here. In an interview with RTS Radio, he said he did not notice Earth's curvature from the small porthole of his chamber, but was convinced that it would be visible to see the curvature if he would use a ruler. Also, he never mentions flat Earth in his diaries, but does mention the globe. And even if true, even if he would have said that, he came not even halfway the 37 kilometers already discussed and busted. So he would never ever have been able to make any reliable statement on the presence or absence of curvature of Earth. So to conclude, are the objections from flat earthers strong or not? Well, based on the desk research I carried out, I would say no. Rotation speed is not an issue, it's the change in speed. Gravity gives an explanation for objects to fall down, air pressure doesn't. The Nikon P900 videos are contestable already at sea, but especially at land. The distance to the moon is questionable. It's a questionable claim, and there is no coherent story. And the curvature can be seen only from a sufficient height. So I would say the objections from observations are not really strong. But what about then the final hurdle, the biblical objections to a rounded Earth? Remember, I discussed several of them. Well, here are a few slides in which I discussed these. Job 38, verse 14. I would say that's poetry, it's a metaphor. It also says, as clay through a seal. Job 37, verse 18 is the same as 38, verse 14, I would say. Isaiah 40, verse 22, the word used here for the earth is also used in Job 22, verse 14, but then it's used for heaven. You don't want to say, I think, that the sky is actually also a flat disk, do you? You're actually saying that the earth, you're actually saying that that's a dome, aren't you? So, but it cannot be that the word used here is meaning flat and a dome as well. That's not likely, I would say. Matthew 4, verse 8. Remember the adversary taking Yeshua to a mountain to see all the kingdoms. Well, of course, that's not any proof at all, because this is a vision, and then anything is possible. Besides, if true, where is that mountain located? Where is that mountain located? Other versions of the story also don't mention this mountain at all. Revelation 7 verse 1, mentioning the corners of the earth, well, it can also mean something else in the four corners. It can also mean four quarters or quadrants. The text about foundations I will discuss in a few slides below. The standing sun and moon in Joshua, difficult to explain, but not impossible. I will discuss it as well in the next one of the next slides. Sorry. Also the text about the ends of the earth and Rakia, I will also come back to that in a different slide. In a separate slide. So regarding foundation, we have in Hebrew 3 different words for foundation. Masada of Masad, Yesuda, and Makom. And what do these foundational texts tell us? Well, the word foundation is used in quite different contexts, and we know at least 3 different words in Hebrew for foundation. And it is clear that it is something, that it is what something is founded on, but it does not have to be something solid or tangible. Yeah, we will see that. So here we have Job 26 verse 7. He stretches out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. How can you hang a flat earth upon nothing? I mean, a flat earth would have a solid foundation, wouldn't it? We also have Psalm 95 verse 4a. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. What about the stationary sun and moon then? Well, to me, in the basis, God is creator, so not a big problem, even though I might not understand. If I try to explain, it could be what I found on the internet, in my desk research. It could have been a superior looming mirage due to the ice surface caused by hailstones. Might also have been that the sun and moon started to rotate with the earth, making it appear as if it were standing still. I don't know if that's possible, but, well, for my Heavenly Father, everything is possible. So even if it seems to be a miracle for us. What about the texts about the ends of the earth then? Well, the word for ends used for this is Ephes, and it first appears in Numbers 13, verse 28, and it has no literal meaning here. Nor do the other 4 verses prior to the first verse that speaks of the ends of the earth. The end of the earth in a flat earth, is that the Arctic wall then? But how do you explain the following text? Deuteronomy 28 verse 49, Isaiah 41 verse 5, 43 verse 6, Jeremiah 25 verse 33, Matthew 12 verse 42. I will show them. These texts definitely do not fit with the Arctic wall ID and refer to different locations. Deuteronomy 28 verse 49. Yes, Yahweh will bring against you a nation from far away that will swoop down on you from the end of the earth, like a vulture, a nation whose language you don't understand. How can we have a nation beyond the Arctic wall? Seriously? Another text from Isaiah 41 verse 5. The coastlands have seen and became afraid. The ends of the earth have trembled. They have approached, and now they have come. How can the ends of the earth tremble? And how can they approach? How to take this literally? How to combine this with the idea of the Arctic wall? Many questions here. Also several questions here. Isaiah 43 verse 6. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, don't hold them back. Bring my sons from far away, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. How can the daughters of Yahweh come from the ends of the earth? If we have an Arctic wall there, who are these daughters, literally taken? Jeremiah 25 verse 33. On that day, those killed by Yahweh will be strewn from one end to the earth, to the other. If taken literally, we have 2 ends of the earth here. Matthew 12 verse 42. The queen of the south will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Shlomo. So that would mean that the Queen of Sheba came from beyond the Arctic Wall? Seriously? Yeah, here's something I forgot to mention in part 1. Maybe one of the last straws that flat earthers can hold. I mean, isn't Enoch, the book of Enoch, pro-flat earth? It might seem so when reading Enoch 18, verse 1 to 5, where he is saying, I saw the foundations of the earth, I saw the cornerstone of the earth. I saw the winds of the earth which support the clouds, and I saw the paths of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of heaven above. Well, I can show you some other verses from Enoch as well, and they don't fit with flat earth. Chapter 78, verse 5, for instance, we see a sun rising in the east and setting in the west. That's not a typical flat earth idea, is it? We also have winds causing the sun and moon to move. Also not a flat earth idea, I would say. And finally, Enoch 78, verse 4, talks about light transferring from the sun to the moon. This is consistent with the conventional understanding that the moon shines by reflecting the sun's light, but definitely not with flat earth. What about rakia then, or rakia? Well, that comes from raka, mean to hammer out or to stretch. It mainly relates to the process and not to the end result. The ark, for instance, was also covered with hammered gold. Rakia is shamayim, is heaven. Depending on the context, the word can refer to that which is directly above us, where there are birds, clouds, and rain. It can also refer to the realm of the heavenly bodies. And finally, it often refers to the whereabouts of God. You don't mean to say that the birds fly among the stars and God is enthroned on the clouds or something like that, would you? Oh, almost at the end of part 2. We still will discuss the objections to the flat earth alternative from science and observation. So, as you might remember from part 1, we have several concepts here, several ideas for a spherical earth. And like I said in part 1, it was new to me, so I immediately had many questions. For instance, how can you explain the difference between day and night? Why would the sun stop at the red line? I mean, it crosses a very short distance from right to left, and it goes for a very long distance from top to bottom. You see, just to compare the 2 green arrows. Here we see another concept, another model. But how do you get in this model half of the Earth in day and half in night? How do you explain a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse? And how do you explain the seasons? Well, you have 2 options. Either the inner path takes less time than the outer. This would mean that the summer is shorter than winter. Or option 2, the sun goes slower inside and faster outside. That would mean that the sun would move through the sky at different speeds, which we don't notice. These pictures were taken from a presentation from a person called Professor Dave. And yeah, I think he has very strong arguments against flat Earth. You may not like his videos because he has a certain tone in which he discusses the opinions of flat earthers, which is not my tone, I would say. But if you just let go of that and filter through and just look at the content of what he is saying, I think he has very strong arguments. So that doesn't look very promising. There seem to be clear objections from the Bible and personal observations against the round Earth, which I already discussed. I don't think they are. But is there a well-developed alternative? Doesn't seem to be. Also, there are additional questions based on observation and science. How do you explain that the moon looks exactly mirrored from the southern hemisphere? How do you explain that we always see the same side of the moon? Is that possible on a flat Earth where the moon rotates in a circle above the disk? How do you explain photos and videos of a rotating spherical Earth? Also, what scale is the flat Earth, which is no more than an equidistant globe projection? How can the sun in this model be at thousands, the moon at hundreds of kilometers, and the dome at its maximum height of just over 100 kilometers? We discussed this already. How does it make sense if the Earth is a flat disk and the sun and moon are spherical? And how do you explain a sunset if the sun is circling above the Earth? How can the sun remain the same size as it circles a short distance? How do you even explain the size of nights and days and staying light in certain places? How do we stay on Earth? Air pressure is not an adequate explanation for why everything falls down, and it is not a force. What predictions can you make based on this flat Earth model regarding the position of the sun or moon, solar and lunar eclipses? I haven't found any. And if there would be gravity on a flat Earth, it would cause some strange effects. The gravity would be strongest in the center, pulling the water there, creating a deep sink towards the edges, as if you were climbing a mountain. And it also would produce crooked or even almost horizontal trees. No wonder flat earthers don't believe in gravity, but that's all too easy, I would say. Okay, so we have several objections. I will now present these in a more structural and organized way. So we have several objections to flat Earth. And at this moment, you might not be able to oversee all those objections. So I will try to present these objections now in a more structural and structured way. So I have four groups here. I have objections in the so-called green area, where observations can be explained from both theories. I have a gray area where I started to doubt. The orange area, serious doubt, and the red area, there I found it inexplicable. So I will show you what I mean by that. So in the green area, we have the two sticks on the Earth. They say that a shadow on two sticks would be straight on a flat Earth. And flat Earth's response is then that when the sun is lower, there is also a different shadow on a flat Earth. So I would say it's explainable. It can be explained in both models, so it's not very strong. The circumference of a sphere can be calculated based on two sticks on a sphere, and that is quite accurate for the Earth. Well, if you assume that the sun is lower, it's also possible with the flat Earth, also not quite strong. Remember also the objections when traveling by plane. They say that certain ways of traveling from one point to the other are not very logic if the Earth would be spherical. But I've heard that from the other side as well. So I would say that's undecided. What about the gray area? Yeah, when you look at all the planets, they are also spherical. The moon and the sun are spherical. Well, the flat Earth's response is that planets don't exist. Yeah, okay, that's all too easy to me. Ships disappearing over the horizon. they say that they can get them back with their strong camera, but I think it's a doubtful case, at least. I think it really depends on the position you take, which was also proven in the Bedford experiment, or the way Wallace repeated it. In the orange area, what do we have there? If the Earth were flat, there would be no nice round shadows on the moon. Flat Earth's response is that God turns on the moon himself. Well, I would say the objection here of the nice shadows on the moon, making the moon look like a full moon or a new moon or anything in between, are pretty strong. I mean, do you really believe that God turns on the moon himself exactly in such a shape that it matches with light on a sphere? Also, in the orange area, with the flat Earth, gravity would work very differently and pull everything towards the center of the flat Earth. Yeah, what about the objection from flat Earthers? They say there is no gravity at all. Well, I think that's all too easy. You need gravity to be absent in order to sustain your model. But yeah, in the red area, we really have problems. I mean, how do you explain time zones? How do you explain seasons? Galaxies look different in the northern or southern hemisphere. The new moon in the northern hemisphere is a mirror image of the southern hemisphere. How do you explain solar and lunar eclipses? And also, the sun as a spotlight is incorrect, because even if you are not in the spotlight, you still see the spotlight. So how do you explain day and night? How do you explain that it's always day in one half of the world and night in the other half? Also, if the sun revolves around the Earth and the moon at a much smaller distance than in heliocentric model, then you should see an increasingly larger sun at sunrise and an increasingly smaller one at sunset. Why don't we see that? And also, we have several images from space showing a spherical Earth, and it's not only images from NASA. Yeah, I was expecting them here already, but I will show these pictures. So how do the opponents of flat Earth, the believers in the Earth as a sphere, see it then? Well, as you might remember from the traditional model that we all have learned, I think, so Earth as a sphere, the sun incredibly far away, but just enough to give life here on Earth. The moon is illuminated by the sun, and the Earth revolves around the sun in 365.25 days. The moon revolves around the Earth. The sun itself does not stand still. And seasons can be explained by the fact that the Earth is 23.5 degrees out of alignment when it revolves around the sun. And here you have the pictures from ESA and Russia. So it's not only confirmed by NASA, but also from other space organizations. So to conclude, there's little left, I would say, from the objections of flat earthers, except maybe with regard to the Earth's rotation speed. Also considering stable constellations, would that be possible if the Earth rotates so fast? Well, I think I discussed that enough. So it's not so much the linear surface, it's the other linear speed, it's the other speed that's relevant, radial speed, which is much, much lower. Yeah, and I think it's possible and positive to do your own research, but census versus science is a false contradiction somewhere. I mean, think of how science started. Yeah, to be honest, I do not really know anymore why I mentioned this here, because this doesn't seem to be an objection. Yeah, and from the Bible, the only objection that I cannot explain is the stationary sun and moon with Joshua. So yeah, if you try to sum up, there are many, many arguments from science, observation, and the Bible that that we can look at. And if you look at these three, I think there are many objections from science against flat Earth, but in favor of a spherical Earth. With regard to observation, it's break even at best, but I think most observations are more in line with spherical Earth than with a flat Earth. And the arguments from the Bible, you can see them as pro flat Earth, but that's only when you read the Bible literally, I would say. So it's time to move on to part 3, but that we will do in the last presentation. We will pause for now. So I hope you enjoyed it and that you have noticed that I really try to look at the objections from flat earthers in an honest way, but that I also presented the other way you could perceive and see it based on the traditional model is more likely to be valid. So yeah, see you next time in part 3. Shalom.